It was the summer of 1942 and the world was on fire. Across the Pacific, the skies thundered with the roar of engines as young pilots took to the air in a desperate struggle for supremacy. Among them was a quiet, determined man from Poplar, Wisconsin, Major Richard Ira Bong. He wasn't the loudest or the most flamboyant, but when he took to the skies, something extraordinary happened. The fighter that became his signature, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, was more than a machine to him. It was an extension of his will, his instincts, and his courage. Richard Bong's journey into aviation began long before the war. Growing up on a farm, he was fascinated by flight. When others watched the birds glide through the Wisconsin sky, Bong imagined himself among them. His dream became reality when he joined the Army Air Corps in 1941, just before America entered World War II. In training, instructors quickly realized there was something special about him. His natural flying sense, precision, and calm under pressure made him stand out. When he transitioned to the twin-engine P-38, a plane known for its incredible speed and firepower, Bong seemed to merge with it completely. While some pilots found the aircraft complex and demanding, Bong treated it like an old friend. He once said the P-38 felt alive in his hands, a partner rather than a tool. By the time Bong arrived in the Pacific Theater, the air war had reached a fever pitch. The Japanese Zero dominated the skies early on, with its unmatched agility and lethal pilots. But the Americans were learning fast, and the P-38 gave them a new edge. With 2 engines, 4 machine guns, and a 20mm cannon, it was deadly in a dogfight and could outclimb, outdive, and outshoot most enemies. Bong's first combat mission came over Papua New Guinea. The heat, humidity, and swarms of insects made life miserable on the ground, but in the sky, Bong felt at home. He quickly developed a reputation for patience and precision. While many pilots fired as soon as they saw the enemy, Bong waited until he was certain. He once told his fellow flyers, "Don't shoot until you see the red in their meatballs," referring to the red circle on the Japanese insignia. It wasn't bravado. It was discipline, the kind that saved lives and won battles. In one of his early missions, Bong dove out of the clouds and caught a formation of Japanese bombers off guard. Lining up his gun sight, he fired short bursts that tore into one then another. His wingman could barely keep up. When they landed, Bong had scored several kills in a single flight. His name began spreading through the squadron like wildfire. But Bong wasn't just a killer in the sky. On the ground, he was known for his shy smile and humble nature. He wrote letters to his sweetheart, Marge, describing the beauty of the sunsets over the Pacific and the terror of combat in the same breath. To his comrades, he was a steadying presence, a man who never let fear or fame change him. As the missions piled up, so did his victories. Each confirmed kill meant another enemy plane downed, another American pilot saved. The numbers grew quickly, 5, 10, 15, 20. Bong became the top ace in the Pacific, and still he remained modest. He once joked that his success came from always being in the right place at the right time. The command began to notice his record, and so did the newspapers back home. Soon his face appeared on posters and headlines. He became a symbol of American skill and courage, though Bong himself never sought the spotlight. His focus remained on flying and on his squadron. In 1943, during one of the fiercest battles over Buna and Salamaua, Bong's unit faced waves of Japanese aircraft trying to destroy Allied positions. Bong and his wingmen climbed into the blazing sky, engines screaming. What followed was chaos, twisting, rolling dogfights across the blue expanse. Bong maneuvered his P-38 with astonishing grace, outflanking 2 Zeros at once. His bursts of fire ripped through one, then he turned sharply to finish the second before it could escape. It was pure instinct, years of practice and courage distilled into a few seconds. When he returned to base that day, his P-38's fuselage was riddled with holes, but Bong climbed out smiling, brushing soot from his face. He had shot down 3 more enemy aircraft, bringing his total to an incredible 21 confirmed kills. His fellow pilots greeted him like a hero, but Bong only shrugged and said, "I was just doing my job." The war, however, was far from over. Each mission carried new dangers, and flak, weather, mechanical failure, or a lucky enemy bullet could end it all. Bong lost close friends in the air, men who shared his dreams and bravery. Each loss weighed on him deeply, yet he kept flying, honoring their memory through action. By early 1944, his legend had grown beyond measure. He became known as America's Ace of Aces. Even General Douglas MacArthur took notice, awarding Bong the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary achievements in combat. But even in the glow of that ceremony, Bong remained humble. When asked how it felt to be a hero, he replied softly, "I'm not. I just had better luck than most." Still, the toll of endless combat began to show. His superiors, fearing for their top ace's safety, ordered him off the front lines for rest and morale duties. Bong protested. He wanted to fly to keep fighting until victory. But orders were orders. He returned to the United States to train new pilots and promote war bonds. Crowds cheered wherever he went, though Bong felt uneasy with fame. He missed the cockpit, the hum of engines, and the clear purpose of combat. As he stood before young pilots eager to prove themselves, Bong often reminded them that skill was nothing without discipline and respect for their aircraft. "Fly smart," he would say. "It's not about glory. It's about getting home." Back home, he reunited with Marjorie, and for a time life seemed peaceful again. Yet as the war continued overseas, Bong couldn't help but feel torn. His friends were still out there, risking their lives. Though he had already given so much, he wanted to do more. By mid-1945, the war was nearing its end. Bong, now one of America's most decorated airmen, began working as a test pilot for new jet aircraft, the next evolution of flight. The world was changing fast, and Bong, ever the pioneer, wanted to be part of it. But fate had other plans. The morning of April 19, 1775, rose like any other day, quiet, pale, and uncertain. But by sunrise, that quiet would be shattered by thunder. The British Army, nearly 700 red-coated soldiers under Major John Pitcairn, marched out of Boston under strict orders. Capture the colonial leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and seize the hidden weapons stored in Concord. They marched in silence, their muskets gleaming, boots striking rhythmically against the dirt road. To the British, it was a simple mission. To the Americans, it was destiny knocking. Along the countryside, the alarm riders had done their work. Bells rang in distant churches, horns blew through sleeping villages, and men rushed from their homes, pulling on coats, grabbing powder horns and muskets. From every direction, farmers and townsmen gathered, men who had never fought a war before, but who refused to let their land be taken. At Lexington Green, as dawn's first light touched the horizon, 77 militiamen stood waiting. Their leader, Captain John Parker, was an aging farmer who had fought in earlier wars. His voice trembled not with fear but conviction as he told his men, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." Moments later, the British column appeared, redcoats blazing against the soft morning mist. Major Pitcairn shouted, "Lay down your arms, you damned rebels." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world held its breath. And then a twist shot. No one knew who fired first. Some said it came from the British ranks, others from behind a fence. But that single spark unleashed the storm. The air exploded with smoke and gunfire. Muskets cracked. Men screamed. The green filled with chaos. The smell of gunpowder, the cries of the wounded, the pounding of boots. When the smoke cleared, 8 colonists lay dead, 10 more wounded. The British cheered and marched onward toward Concord, thinking they had crushed the rebellion before it began. But what they didn't know, the true fight was just beginning. As the redcoats reached Concord's North Bridge, they found something unexpected. Hundreds of militiamen had gathered, watching from the hills and fields. The colonists were no longer disorganized farmers. They were brothers in arms. When the British began to burn supplies in the town, smoke rose into the sky, and that sight broke something inside the Americans. The militiamen advanced. They fired, the British fired back. For the first time, the British troops, who had the most powerful army in the world, began to fall. And then came the order that would change history: fire for liberty. The crack of muskets echoed through the hills, and British soldiers stumbled backward, shocked that these colonists dared to fight, and fight well. Within hours, the mighty redcoats began their retreat back to Boston, marching through miles of open countryside. But the road home became a nightmare. Every hill, every tree, every stone wall hid an American with a musket. From behind fences, barns, and rocks, they fired in and vanished. The redcoats were trapped in a deadly gauntlet. The colonists didn't fight in neat lines like European armies. They fought like ghosts of the forest, appearing and disappearing with deadly precision. For miles, the British bled. Their soldiers collapsed in exhaustion and fear. By the time they finally staggered back into Boston, nearly 300 were dead or wounded. That day, the world witnessed something extraordinary. A new kind of soldier had been born. Not a king's soldier, but a citizen soldier, a man who fought not for pay, but for purpose. Word of the battle spread like wildfire. From colony to colony, news riders galloped through villages shouting, "Lexington! Concord, the war has begun." Bells rang, crowds gathered, and within days, thousands of men were marching toward Boston, volunteers, ready to fight for a cause bigger than themselves. The British commander, General Gage, soon found his army surrounded. Tens of thousands of colonial militia formed a massive ring around Boston, cutting off every escape, and within that siege, new leaders began to emerge, men whose names would echo through history. George Washington, Nathaniel Greene, Israel Putnam, and Henry Knox. But for now, in those first few weeks, the fighting spirit came from ordinary hearts. There were stories that defined the courage of that moment, like Samuel Whittemore, a 78-year-old farmer who stood alone on the road with his musket as the British advanced. He shot 3 soldiers before being shot himself, in the face, the neck, and the arm. Yet somehow he lived. When asked later why he fought, he simply said, "Because it was my duty." Or the story of the women who melted their pewter plates to make musket balls, who baked bread for soldiers, who sent their sons to war with prayers and tears. For every musket the colonists fired, the British fired 10. For every cannon the British rolled out, the colonists had none. Yet they stood. In London, when news of Lexington and Concord reached King George III, he was furious. He called the colonists traitors and vowed to crush the rebellion with overwhelming force. Parliament cheered him on. They were certain America would fall within months. But across the ocean, in the colonies, the spirit of freedom was rising like a tide. The colonial militias soon began to organize under one banner, the Continental Army. And though they lacked uniforms, money, and even shoes, they had something no empire could buy: belief. In the makeshift camps outside Boston, farmers stood beside blacksmiths, carpenters beside merchants. They practiced drilling, loading, marching, learning the art of war while the smoke of their homes still hung in the air. Each day they trained harder. Each night they whispered to each other, "We will be free." Meanwhile, inside Boston, the British soldiers found themselves trapped. Supplies were running short, morale was breaking. They held the city, but not the hearts of the people. Outside the walls, the Americans waited, patient, determined. By June 1775, the next great test came. The Battle of Bunker Hill. Though technically fought on Breed's Hill, it became one of the most legendary moments of the Revolution. Thousands of British soldiers advanced up the hill, bayonets fixed, confident of victory. At the top stood about 1,500 American militiamen with almost no ammunition. Their leader, Colonel William Prescott, gave a command that would become immortal. "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." The British marched closer. The Americans held their ground, and when the enemy was close enough, the colonists unleashed a storm of fire. Rows of British soldiers fell, the air filled with smoke and screams. Twice the British charged, and twice they were driven back. Only when the Americans ran out of gunpowder did the redcoats finally take the hill. It was technically a British victory, but the cost was staggering. More than 1,000 of their men were killed or wounded. The colonists had lost the hill, but they had won something greater: respect. From that day, the British Army realized they were not fighting peasants. They were fighting patriots. The years after Richard Ira Bong's death saw the world change in ways he could never have imagined. The war he had helped win gave rise to a new global order, and the technology he had once tested with his own hands became the foundation of modern aviation. But for those who remembered him, his family, friends, and the countless soldiers who had fought beside him, Bong was not just a name in history books. He was a symbol of the best qualities humanity could offer during its darkest hours: courage, humility, and quiet excellence. In the immediate aftermath of his passing, the nation mourned deeply. Newspapers called him the quiet ace, a man who never let his fame overshadow his humanity. Editorials across the country spoke of his unshakable discipline, his respect for life, and his sense of duty that never wavered even in the face of death. While others chased glory, Bong had simply done what needed to be done. That was his greatest strength, his ability to stay true to himself in a world consumed by chaos. In Wisconsin, Bong's legacy grew roots that would last generations. His hometown of Poplar erected a memorial in his honor, a modest, heartfelt tribute surrounded by the rolling fields where he had once dreamed of flying. The Bong Heritage Center later opened, preserving his medals, photographs, and flight records. School children from across the country would visit, listening in awe to the story of the farm boy who became America's greatest fighter ace. His P-38 Lightning, the aircraft that carried him to immortality, was lovingly restored and displayed as a reminder of his skill and sacrifice. Marjorie Bong, his widow, carried his memory with quiet grace. Though she never remarried, she dedicated her life to preserving Richard's story, ensuring that future generations would know not only the hero, but the man behind the medals. She once said he never thought of himself as special. He just wanted to do his job and come home. Her words echoed the essence of Bong's life: duty without ego, bravery without vanity. As decades passed, the legend of Bong intertwined with the broader story of American aviation. Pilots who flew in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond would speak his name with reverence. The tactics he had perfected in the Pacific became the foundation for modern aerial combat training. His insistence on patience, precision, and respect for the aircraft influenced generations of fighter pilots. Even in an age of missiles and radar, Bong's principles remained timeless. By the 1950s, the Air Force that Bong had once served evolved into a new branch of the U.S. military. The dawn of the jet age brought incredible advancements: planes that could break the sound barrier, climb into the stratosphere, and cross continents in hours. Yet every pilot who strapped into a cockpit still carried a part of Bong's legacy. They knew that behind every machine, no matter how advanced, there had to be a steady hand and a brave heart. That lesson came from him. In Poplar, the community kept his story alive through annual ceremonies. Veterans gathered to honor his memory, sharing stories of the young man who had fought alongside them. Some had flown with him. Others had simply heard his name over the radio. But all spoke of his humility. He never bragged, one pilot recalled. He'd just smile and say he was lucky. But we knew better. It wasn't luck. It was skill, and it was heart. The 1960s and 70s saw America enter new conflicts and new frontiers. The space race began, and astronauts, many of them former test pilots, cited Bong as an early inspiration. His willingness to risk everything for the advancement of flight mirrored their own courage as they soared beyond the Earth. NASA's early pioneers, like Chuck Yeager and Neil Armstrong, came from the same tradition of discipline and bravery that Bong embodied. In many ways, he was a spiritual ancestor to them all. As time went on, the name Richard Bong became synonymous with honor in aviation circles. The Air Force established the Richard Bong Training Center, where new recruits learned about his missions, his techniques, and the mental discipline that had made him so effective. Every young pilot was told the story of how Bong would hold his fire until he was certain of a hit, conserving ammunition and ensuring maximum impact. "Don't waste a shot," he'd say, words that became a mantra in aerial combat schools around the world. In the early 1980s, long after Bong's passing, his legacy reached a new generation through documentaries and books. His story captivated audiences who had never known the war, but could still feel its echo through his heroism. Television specials showed black and white footage of Bong's P-38 slicing through the sky, accompanied by interviews with his surviving comrades. They spoke of his calm voice over the radio, his gentle humor, and the way he would always check on his wingmen after every mission. Even in the chaos of combat, he had been a leader through kindness, not command. The more people learned about him, the more they understood why he stood apart. Bong's greatness wasn't measured solely by his 40 confirmed kills. It was measured by the way he carried himself. He refused to celebrate destruction. Instead, he focused on the lives saved through his victories. To him, every enemy aircraft destroyed meant fewer bombs dropped on Allied soldiers and civilians. He once wrote, "I don't fight to kill, I fight to protect." Those words captured the essence of his character, a warrior's courage guided by a human heart. In the late 1990s, as aviation museums expanded across America, the Richard Bong Veterans Historical Center became one of the most visited sites in Wisconsin. Pilots from around the world came to pay their respects. Some left their flight patches or medals beside his photo, symbolic gestures of gratitude to the man who had shown them what it meant to fly with honor. School children would listen to recordings of his radio transmissions and marvel at how calm he sounded in the middle of battle. To them, he was not just a name from history. He was proof that true heroism never fades. In recent years, as technology has transformed warfare and flight beyond anything Bong could have imagined, his legacy remains surprisingly relevant. Drone pilots, space engineers, and fighter aces of the 21st century still study his methods. His balance of instinct and discipline continues to be the foundation of aerial strategy. And every time an American aircraft takes to the sky, it carries a piece of the tradition that Bong helped define. Today, nearly 8 decades after his final flight, Major Richard Ira Bong's story still inspires countless people, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He laughed with his comrades, feared for his friends, and dreamed of a peaceful world where he wouldn't have to fight. His story is not one of endless victory, but of quiet humanity shining through the storm of war. If Bong were alive today, he would likely be humbled by the attention his name still receives. He would probably smile, shake his head, and say, "I just did my job." But to millions of Americans, and to anyone who has ever looked up at the sky with wonder, Richard Bong represents something far greater. He is the spirit of bravery that refuses to die, the calm voice in the cockpit that says, "We'll make it home." His story, told through the generations, reminds us that true valor is not found in fame or medals, but in the simple act of doing one's duty with honor and heart. Major Richard Ira Bong flew into history not to be remembered as a legend, but to defend what he loved. And in doing so, he became timeless. The wind over Wisconsin still carries his name. The silver wings of every aircraft gleaming in the sun still reflect his spirit. And every pilot who looks to the horizon, chasing dreams, defying limits, and facing danger with quiet courage, carries a spark of the man who once soared higher than any other. This is the enduring legacy of Major Richard Ira Bong, the farm boy who became America's ace of aces, and whose valor will forever echo in the skies above. Stories of valor,